2009 and 2010, two different executives decided that the two houses stand on land which is public open space. The council then imposed a covenant on the two houses restricting any further development. The Sudbury Town Neighbourhood Plan confirmed Barham Park as a local green space to be protected by policy BP1. The neighbourhood plan says, Barham Park, and I quote, will be given a long-term protection and proposals for development which is not ancillary to the use of the land for recreational purposes will be resisted, close quote. It goes further. Any proposal for the reuse or redevelopment of park buildings for residential use will not be supported. In paragraph 13 of your report, planning officers tried to suggest that the two houses are not park buildings. This is wrong. The Sudbury Neighbourhood Plan treats all structures in Barham Park as buildings. Why? In the very recent past, these same two houses were converted to a temporary children's centre, a community facility. Until recently, there was a caretaker's flat in another part of the buildings within Barham Park. All buildings within Barham Park were once residential. They were the Barham family's home. The Sudbury Neighbourhood Plan, a reference to park buildings, means all buildings, the two houses and everything else. Now the National Planning Framework says, quote, local communities through local and neighbourhood plans should be able to identify for special protection green areas of particular importance to them. By designing land as local green spaces, local communities will be able to rule out new developments. The council policy says, quote, the council's core strategy seeks to protect areas of open space. Through the neighbourhood plan, additional weight can be given to the protection of open space in Sudbury Town. Sudbury Neighbourhood Plan, quote, seeks to protect open spaces and only allow redevelopment of buildings within Barham Park which support community activities. A planning inspector confirmed that the plan confirms with the London Plan and Rent Core Strategy. Over 900 residents, the executive and the current leader of Brent Council supported the Sudbury Town Neighbourhood Plan and policy BP1. So to conclude, the two houses sit on land which is part of the park. The two houses are park buildings, by all definitions within various policies. Demolition of two houses and replacing with four taller houses is clearly redevelopment. And you can see the definition in the English dictionary. So just a reminder...
Sorry, I've given some latitude, you have done over 3 minutes.
Can I just conclude my final
one sentence, please?
So remember policy BP1. Any proposal for the reuse or redevelopment of park buildings for residential use will not be supported. Therefore, this committee should support neighbourhood plans, otherwise what is the point of involving local residents in local planning? Thank you.
If you just turn the microphone off, please. Any members of the committee like to ask any questions or clarification on at this point? Councillor Rees.
Thank you. Councillor Lorber, you, I believe, were a councillor in Brent for quite a number of years, up till May 2014. Were you involved in the creation of the Sudbury Town Neighbourhood Plan? And if you were, and even whether you were or whether you weren't, do you know why the covenant was put in place?
Thank you, Councillor. Well, there are two issues here. The Sudbury Neighbourhood Plan was developed by the Sudbury Town Residents Association, a very active local residents association which was very keen to protect their area. They spent, I don't know, others may correct me, probably about 2 years on this. They were supported by council officers from the planning service. The council, or through the council, a substantial grant was made available for this to happen. And loads of individuals within Sudbury knocked on loads of doors to talk to people, had site meetings, had local meetings, had public meetings to develop the neighbourhood plan policy. And if, just for your benefit, can I just remind you of what I read about the framework, because this is very important. Because this has implications. The decision you make today has implications not just for Barham Park, but the whole of Brent. Local communities, through local and neighbourhood plans, should be able to identify for special protection green areas of particular importance to them. The Sudbury Neighbourhood Plan developed policy BP1 specifically for that purpose. If you approve this application, you might as well chuck the whole process of neighbourhood plans into the bin. What does it mean, or what does it say to local residents? Please spend 2 years developing your plan, and then you say it doesn't count for anything. And just to emphasize one other point, policy BP1 effectively overrides all other policies that the officers are referring to, paragraphs 10 to 13 in the report. Policy BP1 is the primary policy, and that is what you have to stick with. That's what local people have developed, that's what the executive and this council has agreed to as part of its local plan, and it's cast in stone. On the issue of the covenant, okay, for a variety of reasons, sometime 14 years ago, the council was facing a position where the large estate, large council-owned estate opposite the park, this section of park, was falling apart. It needed redeveloping. There was a need for decanting purposes. There were 180 council tenants that needed to be rehoused. And the 2 houses were identified as possible uses for decanting. Okay? That eventually didn't go through. At the same time, council officers identified the fact that Barham Park itself had been somewhat neglected. There was lack of money. Remember, we're talking about a period after the 2008 crash. There wasn't a lot of money for local government. And the officers came forward and said, here we have 2 houses, if we sell them for an independent valuation of £630,000, we will have £630,000 to invest in the rest of the park. That was eventually dealt with. There were two executives and two political parties in control of the council over this period. That was eventually taken over by the new executive. And to emphasize the fact that this was public open space, and to ensure that the purchaser was fully aware of what was intended here. Yes, you can buy the 2 houses. We will have a pot of money to invest in the Barham Park, but it's 2 houses and nothing more. No more redevelopment in line with the council's then core strategy, subsequently more than endorsed by the local plan, local neighbourhood plan.
Thank you.
If we just keep the answers a bit briefer, please. But yeah, carry on, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Now, you're probably aware that covenants are not material planning considerations, but I believe you feel that in this case they should be considered material planning considerations. Is that the case? And if so, can you explain why?
Okay, so normally I would imagine when planning is dealing with covenants, or if covenants are mentioned, they probably date back from the 19th century. They're all documents and they can be forgotten about, overridden because things have changed. This is not one of those covenants. This is a covenant that the council, on behalf of the Barham Trust, entered into in the full knowledge as to the reasons why the covenant was being put in place. It was the additional protection for a public park and an additional protection to ensure that the core strategy of Brent Council, which is a commitment to protect open spaces and parks, was protected by a cast iron guarantee. And that is the big difference.
So what you're saying is that if we grant permission as recommended by the officers, we would be going against our own covenant. Is that correct?
Well, the covenant may well be a different battleground. I mean, there's a battle here now, and you have loads of residents, loads of organisations. You heard the list of the residents' associations that are opposed to this. The covenant will be dealt with separately. and members of the council will have to get involved in that discussion. The point I'm trying to make in relation to the covenant is that if you take the cumulative position that we are facing today, and the cumulative position is Brent Council core strategy, the neighbourhood planning process, which basically tries to empower local residents to have their say, a meaningful say, not just a rubber stamping type of thing, and the fact that the neighbourhood plan includes policy BP1, and then backed up by the council intent to protect this particular section of the park through this covenant, I think you have plenty of ammunition on which to refuse this application. It is against policy and it is against everything that this council stands for.
Thank you for you clarifying that.
Any other further questions from members of the committee? I would just like to ask one, if I may. The bit I'm sort of slightly trying to understand here in terms of, sort of local objection is, you know, I'm using like a sort of cycle, you know, through the park, got like power right next to it, and I'm sort of aware of it. We all want to protect open spaces, it's hugely important. But this is obviously a dilapidated set building which could be redeveloped. Nothing will be sort of encroaching the park. There's nothing you could do in the park today where it's cycling, playing sports, using a playground that you won't be able to do if this application were to go through, and actually what maybe a bit of an eyesore of the building may be improved. So we've obviously heard, you know, significantly, you know, reasons against, but what I'm sort of struggling to understand is why it would do so much damage to the park, you know, based on the fact that it is obviously on the footprint of the buildings that are already there and would be a more modern design, and nothing within the park in terms of all the things that people use it for and should be able to use it for. I just don't see how any of that would necessarily be affected by this application.
Well, firstly, these are not dilapidated buildings. They are houses which are currently occupied. There are people coming in and out of those houses, and there are cars parked outside those houses all the time. So they're not dilapidated. They are residential properties that could be renovated as they are at the moment. The point here is that they're not being replaced like for like. They are being replaced by taller buildings, number one, and the bulk of those buildings is much greater. So not only are you getting 4 houses, which may look very similar in terms of the mass from the front, except they are taller, inevitably, by squeezing 4 houses into a site which is 2, means that you're also encroaching on the back gardens, and the drawings from the officers will be able to show that. Inevitably, when you build housing into a park, there is activity, right? The bikers come and deliver the pizza, the repairman comes, etc., etc. There is more activity in the park. We had a very lucky weekend, well, we had a very nice weekend. If you went into that section of the park on Saturday or Sunday, it was full of people. Because the council decided on the strategy of letting grass grow in the middle of the parks to help everybody else, the people who used to be able to play cricket in the park can no longer do so. Therefore, they were playing cricket in this particular location on Saturday and Sunday. So people value this area. They want it retained as part of the park because that's what it always has been, irrespective of some of the comments made by the officers. As from 1906, when the railway came, this land was part of the Barham family home. And if you look at maps from 1912, you will see surrounded by trees as part of the park. This is park, this is this is public open space, and this is protected by clear, defined, consulted on, agreed policies that local people have supported. All they expect their planning committee to do is to stand up for them and for their rights.
Okay, I think we'll move on to, is this a new question, Councillor? I think I'll take one last question.
Yes, it's a very quick question. How easy do you think it would be to renovate those houses and bring them up into a condition where they could be lived in or used for other purposes, like a nursery or something like that, or a community centre?
Well, I'm not an expert. All I can tell you is that the houses were originally built for park keepers who used to work in Barham Park. Barham Park was acted as a plant nursery for the whole of the borough. So we obviously employed quite a lot of staff, and a decision was made by the Bank Council to build housing for some of those workers. When they became empty in the mid to late 2010 or so, they were very quickly converted into a children's centre, a temporary children's centre, because at the time the council had made a decision to place part of the children's centre in the then public Barham Park Library and also Wembley Hospital. When the children's centre was eventually closed and the houses were sold, they were very quickly brought back into use as rental properties. A builder would have to tell you how easy it would be, but I can't imagine that it's too complicated. They would need renovation internally and a bit of work outside.